This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. David Schemm, State Executive Director for the Kansas Farm Service Agency, kicks off the show as he highlights what he learned in Washington, D.C. and the new Farmer Bridge Assistance Program. Continuing the show is grad student in K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry, Adam King, discussing how producers can use a failed wheat crop for cattle rations. Part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, Todd Gunderson, and Jason Warner concludes today's show as they converse about bull fertility. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show hearing from the State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. David, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, Shelby.
David, last time we were talking with the Farm Service Agency, we talked with Todd Barrows because you were on a trip in D.C., and what were you up to?
You know, since being appointed in this position here last May, leadership in D.C. had been planning and wanting to do a orientation and opportunity for all of the state executive directors that have been appointed to get back there, engage with leadership there in D.C. at USDA. Opportunity to engage, really honored to be able to meet the Secretary Brooke Rollins there. Also have opportunity to chat with the Undersecretary Richard Fordyce of FPAC, the Deputy Undersecretary Brooke Appleton, and then even clear on down into the FSA side of things, our Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs and Field Operations and also farm loans. So a lot of good discussion back there with the leadership, them communicating what priorities and things that are coming down, things we need to be watching for. And then obviously Shelby, on our part for Kansas producers up there, communicating them back to them what we're seeing out here in the state, and as far as offices, county offices, and again, our focus here, number one focus is continue to make sure that we give our producers across the state that gold level standard that they know and embrace. So great time back there in D.C. Obviously, the opportunity to be able to see the White House, the Capitol with the trees in front of them, really, really beautiful. City is just gorgeous this time of year, Shelby.
David, do you also get the opportunity then to meet with the other state executive directors?
That's what such a key thing is for us here, just to familiarize everybody's self. They kind of break up the country into regions for SEDs, and so Kansas is in kind of that quote-unquote Midwest, but also Southwest region there, and so a lot of opportunity not only able to, engage with the other SEDs in our regions, whether it's Texas or Illinois or Indiana, but also to our SEDs from Vermont to California and Florida there. Really good dialogue, It's always interesting to see, obviously a lot of similarities and challenges and things that we look at as trying to make sure that we deliver these programs there. But, obviously there's nuances and differences between states, Shelby. We were talking about the programs, and I laughingly joked to some of the Vermont and Maryland SEDs that I was like, some of the crab loss programs we just don't deal a lot with here in Kansas. So, and obviously vice versa, when they start talking about some of the livestock programs or various commodity programs, they don't deal with them as much as what we do. So, again, all part of it, trying to make sure that we're doing the best we can to deliver programs to producers.
And thinking of programs, is there another one to let producers know about?
Fairly sizable announcement came out. Actually, some of the announcement came out while we were back there in D.C., Shelby. And I know probably many of our producers have already heard at least some stuff on it, but that's the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program that was just announced by President Trump as well as Secretary Rollins. And basically what it is, Shelby, is it's about $12 billion that has been set aside by USDA to help producers that basically, from the previous administration, the lack of trade that we've had to be able to address some of those losses that producers have experienced in commodities there. Specifically, 11 billion of it has been set aside towards programs, row crop farmers who produce, a fairly wide range of crops, everything from barley and chickpeas, obviously corn, sorghum, wheat, soybeans, sunflowers. So that 11 billion has been set aside there. Some of the key things I want to note just briefly is that it's actually going to be should be a pretty easy program for producers in the sign-up process. There was a deadline, I should say, here on December 19th for updating their acreage reports if there were any changes there. And for our producers, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about 2025 acreage reports. Obviously, a lot of our producers have just gotten done with their acreage reporting for wheat here just a few days ago, but that's for their 2026 crop. So the acreage reporting that this deadline was talking about was not talking about that deadline. It was for all these crops that we planted this last spring, for the soybeans, corn, grain, sorghum, and or wheat that we would have harvested actually back here in that June, July time frame there. So, there was a little bit of a deadline if there's any changes for producers there on the 19th. Here we're expecting between now and in the end of the year for basically the dollar amount that's been kind of assigned to the various commodity to be released by USDA in D.C. by the economist office there. And so basically this program is going to be pretty straightforward, is that dollar amount per commodity will be applied on the number of acres that the producer planted of the commodity there. And that could kind of give a rough general idea of how that program payment is developed there and how that 11 billion will be allocated out there. So again, the announcement should be coming out shortly. After that announcement comes out there, producers should start to receive a pre-filled application form there. And then kind of the date that what's been indicated to us is at the end of February 28th, producers who do qualify for that Farmer Bridge Assistance Program can expect those payments to start being released there at the end of February.
David, you mentioned the program having $12 billion, but $11 billion of it being for row crop producers. Where's that other $1 billion?
I'm glad you asked. No, so the other $1 billion is definitely targeted towards our specialty crop growers there. Obviously in Kansas here are various fruits, vegetables, all of those non-commodity programs there. And those payments rates on those are also trying to be in the process of being generated there. And so more announcements to be coming on that part of that there. So yeah, that's what that $1 billion set aside is for on that.
And one more program that we've mentioned a few times that I want to bring up so we don't forget about the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program, Stage 2.
So obviously, like kind of doing that recap again, like you mentioned, Shelby, there. Stage 1 went out there for producers who suffered the deeper losses there, based upon, again, crop insurance for those who suffered some crop losses in 23 and 24 to be able to address those. Stage 2 then was announced there, and that's for more of the shallow loss there. So it's for those producers who, again, experienced those losses in 23 or 24, but did not necessarily receive any type of insurance indemnity because the loss was shallow enough. It just did not trigger any type of crop insurance payment there. So we've been in the process of that. When I looked at the dashboard here just the other day, showed that we had about 80,000 potential applicants there, and offices have been rolling in on that pretty fast and furious. I know we've gotten quite a few producers signed up and some payments out the door on that already. So producers do have until the end of April to get signed up for that program, but come in. Those applications should be pretty much already pre-filled out there with data that we have received from RMA there. If they have some questions, obviously they can have their production records and verify what we show from RMA. But again, relatively easy program for producers to sign up there, see what kind of payments they would qualify. And I know our offices have been busy working on that.
And the FSA offices will be closed a few days around the holidays. And when will that be?
As we kind of wrap up and close out the end of the year, and like you say, Shelby, kind of talk about the holiday season that's coming up, discussing here with our team, I just do have to brag just briefly here up on the incredible people we have at FSA and all of our county offices across the state there. This last year, a lot of work, a lot of dedication, a lot of challenges out there, but our staff did a great job. Our farm programs, which obviously includes various ARC PLC, CRP payments there. Kansas FSA issued $1.83 billion to producers across the state this last year. We made an additional right at $500 million worth of new loans out there. Our loan portfolio is about $1.45 billion for our producers out there. So just incredibly proud of the high quality of employees that we have out here that work every day hard to try to make sure we deliver these programs to producers there. A little bit of time off is obviously well deserved for them to be able to spend with their family in the holiday season. President Trump was very gracious in being able to give federal workers a little bit of additional time off this year. So this year, our employees will have Christmas Eve off, including Christmas Day, as well as the day after. So our offices will be closed again the 3 days here of this week here, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after. And then as we start to get ready to bring in the new year, our offices will also be closed on January 1 there. So again, well-deserved time off by our employees, and quite honestly, well-deserved for our producer, our livestock and row crop producer, all of our specialty crop, all of our producers across the state, time to be able to spend with family and enjoy a little bit of time away.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Good to always speak with you.
That was State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. Tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing how to use failed wheat crop in cattle rations with grad student in K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry, Adam King. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Adam, when we mentioned failed wheat, what are we looking at?
So in 2023, Kansas really saw a big drought that left about 29% of their wheat crops just failed. And then we saw 2.35 million acres of these crops, not coming to harvest and being left abandoned. And so in this study in particular, we focused on a wheat crop that was infested with Palmer amaranth and kochia weeds. Those weeds are herbicide resistant. And so instead of trying to spray them or let them trying to till them back in and have the chance of them coming back next year, we elected to take that failed wheat crop with those weeds, bale it up, and then see what we could do feeding it to the cattle.
So when you say feeding to the cattle, what did that part of this research look like?
We use this for their forage or their roughage source. So that consists about 7% of the diet for that feedlot ration. The other ingredients we had was about 64% of that ration was dry rolled corn. We had 29% of it wet distiller's grain.
What did you use as a control for comparison?
For control, we used a sorghum sedan hay.
How many cattle did you use in this research?
We used 300 Angus and Angus cross steers for this.
And so when you look at this feed analysis, you mentioned that this was 7% of the ration. How did it all break down?
So for the rations themselves, they were pretty similar. The real differences you saw were in the hay. So in the hay, we saw a 2% difference in crude protein, an 8% difference in acid detergent fibers, and a 2.5% difference in neutral detergent fibers. But when you mix it all together, the biggest difference we had was a 2% difference in total digestible nutrients.
Any concerns with that 2% difference?
It's just going to be less nutrients for the cattle to consume per necessarily bite they get, if that makes sense.
And so what did you see from this research?
So really, we saw a lot more of the same than we saw that was different. So when we're looking at things from a data perspective, our body weights throughout the trial were actually very similar. We did carcass data on these animals. We sent them to get butchered and to get the information back. And we saw no differences on dressing percentages, marbling, hot carcass weight, carcass yield grade, ribeye area, or instances of liver abscesses, which is a indicator of animal health. Where we did see a difference, though, was when we're looking at average daily gain, dry matter intake, and our feed to gain ratio. So for our average daily gain, we saw a difference of 0.2 with the wheat group, the group with the wheat roughage being higher. For the second half of the study, the sorghum Sudan actually surpassed the wheat group in average daily gain by 0.5 pounds. And then the overall throughout the entirety of the study, we saw a difference of 0.1 pounds. So we saw a difference there, but 0.1 pounds isn't that big of a difference, really. And then our next place where we saw a big difference was in our dry matter intake. So early on in the study, we saw a difference of 0.7 pounds dry matter intake with the sorghum Sudan group being higher. For the second half of the study, we saw a 2-pound difference in dry matter intake, again with the sorghum Sudan group being higher. And then throughout the entirety of the trial, the sorghum Sudan group ate 1 more pound dry matter intake per head per day than the wheat kochia group.
Were you able to see any reason as to why, when you looked at average daily gain, at the beginning they were gaining more weight with the wheat versus later for the average daily gain they were gaining more with the sorghum Sudan?
Really, I don't know if there's necessarily a definite reason into why that they flip-flopped like that. I think it is interesting that they did that.
What did you see for feed to gain ratio?
Feed to gain ratio early on, we saw the sorghum Sudan group have a higher feed to gain ratio, so being less efficient than the wheat kochia group. In the second half of the study, we saw that wheat kochia group then be less efficient than the sorghum Sudan by 0.3. But throughout the entirety of the study, when you look at the overall study, there was no differences in feed to gain. So again, that's another kind of instance where they flipped throughout the trial, but really we're not seeing any differences for those two.
What were some big takeaways you feel like you saw from when you were going through all of this work?
So I think the biggest takeaway is how similar they were. People sometimes think that seeing a big difference in a study is what makes a study a good study. But really what we're seeing here is that there's not a big difference, that you can supplement your cattle with these weeds and these failed wheat crop and still have performance that's very similar. And so I think the biggest takeaway with this is you can use that water that's captured by those weeds in a drought situation and still be able to utilize that and recycle those weeds that could have been put to waste.
Do you see this as also a potential aspect where a relationship could be built between a feedlot owner or manager and maybe a crop producer?
Absolutely. I think the study does a really good job of showing that you can use these, that you can take these, what's a big problem for a grain producer or a crop producer that has these infested weeds in their field and a failed wheat crop, and you can kind of make lemonade per se out of it by selling it to a feed yard that could actually use these. And this is a great piece of evidence for that grain producer to say, yeah, you can actually use this, and it performs similar to other hay crops in the region.
Adam, if people are wanting to find out more information or have questions on this research, what's your recommendation for getting them answered?
So I'll give you 2 email addresses here. The first one is for Dr. Emma Briggs, who is my professor over this study. So that email is going to be eabriggs@ksu.edu. You can also contact me. My email address is adamking@ksu.edu.
Adam, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That was grad student in K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry, Adam King, as he was discussing using failed wheat crop for cattle rations. If you have questions about this study, you can reach out to Adam or Emma Briggs. And if you'd like to do that, Adam's email is adamking@ksu.edu. That is adamking@ksu.edu. Or you can reach out to Emma at eabriggs@ksu.edu. That is eabriggs@ksu.edu. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA food safety expert Meredith Carruthers as they discuss food safety when it comes to holiday leftovers.
Is a large cut of meat the centerpiece of your holiday dinner with family and friends? You know, turkey, ham, beef roast, leg of lamb, prime rib. You're saving me a spot at the dinner table, right? Oh, I see how that is. Well, what about leftovers? You know, something for a turkey or ham sandwich from what is left and uncarved from your dinner? Maybe we should serve you something instead. Food safety information provided by USDA food safety expert Meredith Carruthers.
If you have large portions left over, especially if you only carved off a few slices, or if you're cooking ahead of time and going to reheat it the next day or something like that, it is unsafe to refrigerate those large portions of meat as large portions of meat. They need to be cut, carved, sliced down into smaller portions, and then stored in smaller containers or shallow containers so they can cool properly in the fridge.
That also means immediately refrigerating or freezing wrapped or contained leftovers for rapid cooling and food safety. This also applies to side dishes served in large quantities. So say for a casserole, for instance.
That's going to hold a lot of heat. So very helpful and much safer, and really important to break it down into smaller containers or into smaller portions before putting it into the refrigerator, which makes sure that it is cooling safely and properly and that your leftovers aren't going to come back to bite you later.
Some other food safety tips regarding leftovers provided by Meredith and USDA's Meat and Poultry Hotline. 1-888-MP Hotline. Make sure leftovers are wrapped well, whether placed in airtight packaging or sealed tight in containers, so as to keep foodborne bacteria out, retain moisture, and prevent leftovers from picking up odors from other foods. In terms of proper storage time for leftovers, from a food safety perspective, the safe range is 3 to 4 days in the refrigerator, 3 to 4 months in the freezer. Keep in mind, while leftovers in the freezer can be kept indefinitely, flavor and moisture loss will occur over time. Need to know some other food safety tips, such as how to reheat frozen leftovers and relive those holiday meals? Well, in addition to the Meat and Poultry Hotline, questions on food safety can be emailed to this address, MP Hotline, all one word, at USDA.gov. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was USDA's Rod Bain and Meredith Carruthers. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but I would like to go ahead and let you know that this will be our last show of 2025, and we will be back with more for you on Friday, January 2nd. If you want to check out other things from Agriculture Today during our time off, you can do so by going to agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we conclude our show with part of a BCI Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, Todd Gunderson, and Jason Warner.
Todd, you just had a paper that was published looking at evaluating bulls and some of the challenges that we face in that area. And a lot of times we talk about bulls as being fertile or infertile. And I may ask Bob first, the subfertility, tell me what that means, and then Todd, tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
I think actually subfertility is more common than infertility. Infertility would mean we turn bulls out with cows and they get no pregnancies. That's actually pretty rare. That either takes, a severe, leg injury or something like that where he can't mount, can't breed, or severe testicular or epididymal problems, something like that, and oftentimes noticeable because the bull is, very ill or can't move and those kind of things. What is more common is bulls that underperform in that we really expect those bulls to be able to go out there and breed a couple cows a day and get them pregnant. And if he fails to do that, meaning that, yes, he gets some cows pregnant, but it's not at the pace that we would expect bulls to be able to perform. And that's actually, because it's kind of a gray area, that's a little more difficult to detect. than infertility. But we use things like their overall health. But we're far from perfect at predicting those bulls that are kind of subfertile.
So would you agree with Bob's comments on we're hard to find those subfertile bulls, or are there some other ways we can find them?
Well, yes, I would agree largely with what Bob had to say. I think to define subfertility, you need to define what fertility is first. You need to have some type of a metric. And in all of my research and discussions with other experts in this field, I don't know that we have an agreed upon metric for what truly is a fertile bull. But there is one metric that I have seen in print that I really like. It's my personal favorite, and that is that a bull should be able to impregnate 25 healthy, actively cycling cows in a 65 to 70 day period. To me, that seems like a fairly rational benchmark. And part of that is because it involves some dimension of scale. Cow to bull ratio is a very important metric economically for productivity and efficiency. I could throw one bull out there for every 5 cows. Now, the probability that I'm going to get cows pregnant is much higher, but it's much less profitable because those bulls represent a significant expense. So being able to have more cows with one bull benefits me greatly. The problem is there's an upper limit to that, both biologically and from a risk management standpoint. If I turn one bull out with 50 cows, there's a decent chance that he will be able to get that job done in the time period I want him to. But if he fails for whatever reason, then that's a massive loss that I incur because now I'm taking a much bigger risk on more cows. So any metric for fertility or subfertility has to involve scale. I like the metric of a group of cows being able to achieve a rate of conception per estrus cycle of 60 to 70%, 2/3. I think that's a good metric. I think biologically that's probably as good as we can do. And so finding ways to identify bulls that either can or cannot achieve those types of numbers is critically important. You know, we have tools like the bull breeding soundness evaluation that does an okay job of doing that. But I like the comments that our friends down in South Africa made about it's not just about doing an evaluation on the bull. You got to be out there watching them work. Bulls are not just semen factories. They're semen delivery systems. In terms of natural breeding situations, you have to look at bulls in both of those dimensions. Can they produce fertile semen, and can they deliver that semen to the places that we need it to go? And if we have any suspicion that they can't, then we need to take a hard look at whether that bull is going to be the right bull for us.
I like the kind of in-breeding season evaluations as we go through. Jason, do you see producers doing that? Do you see them evaluating as you go through the season?
Through the season, that's where it gets to be a lot more challenging because how do you do a really good job of detecting that? And if you have losses that are occurring or you've got bulls that are not doing what they're designed to do, how do you practically pick that up in most production systems, right? So I do think that's a challenge. I think generally speaking, our producers do a really nice job of recognizing the importance of breeding soundness exams prior to the start of that breeding season.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, and our next Ag Today show for you will be on Friday, January 2nd. I hope everyone has a safe and happy holiday season.